Hello world, hello internet, and welcome back to this 5th episode of the 2023 Nix Developer Dialogues. I am Valentin, your host. My host name is Frickler Handwerk, and this show is supposed to give you a better idea how a large open source software project such as Nixpkgs ticks on the inside and show some of the faces behind the avatars and internet handles. Now today I have to start with a conflict of interest disclaimer. This show is essentially brought to you by the European Commission through the NGI program, the Next Generation Internet program, which funds the so-called NGI Zero consortium led by the NLNet Foundation. The NixOS Foundation, which is also part of this consortium, is paying me to help organize Summer of Nix, which involves also running these shows, which are a tradition to help Summer of Nix participants get more involved in the Nix community and open source software in general. Now, I also happen to work for a company called Tweak that is very involved in the Nix ecosystem, which means that I'm also getting paid for doing other things around Nix. And that on its own should not be an issue. But my guest today, Silvan, is a colleague of mine, and we work closely together. And this obviously raises some potential for conflict of interest, and we should be open about this. To be clear, I did not invite Silvan because we get along so well, which we certainly do, or because someone at Tweak told me to. Definitely this is not the case. But the same pattern as for all the guests on this show apply. Silvan is an incredibly prolific and highly influential, very long-term contributor to the Nix ecosystem. In particular, he runs the Nixpkgs Architecture Team, a well-established group in the Nix community. And he has merged multiple significant RFCs, proposals that he made that were accepted by the community. We will talk about that in a bit. All that is to say, my mission here is to work towards the goals of the NGI program and serve the Nix community and the open source culture in general. And regardless of that, all my opinions are my own. If you have any questions about this, feel free to get in touch. You will find me on GitHub, Discourse, the NixOS Discourse, and Matrix. And with that out of the way, let me remind you briefly, all our live viewers today, that you can send us your questions from anywhere you are watching this. There's also a Matrix channel for questions and discussions. And if you check out the calendar event for this show, you will find a link to the studio, which you can join to be part of the show, ask your questions in person. I would love to have you here. And now, with all that out of the way, welcome our guest today, Silvan Mosberger, known as Infinisil. Welcome.
Hello, glad to be here.
Hello, Silvan. Thank you for taking time. Let's jump right in. So maybe if you want to add something to our potential conflict of interest, feel free to.
Sounded great. No.
Well, our topic today is paving roads through the jungle, Nixpkgs Architecture. We'll get to it in a minute, but you have to answer my first and obvious question that I'm asking anyone here on the show. How or who or what got you into Nix, and what made you stick?
Yeah, I was expecting this, yes. So I think I started Nix in like 2017 or so. So I was in university at the time, and I was using macOS. But slowly macOS it did some things I didn't quite understand. I couldn't really configure it that well. And I already knew about Haskell, and it was like purely functional programming is actually pretty nice. And then I heard about Nix, which is applying that to the operating system. And then in like the next, like some time in 2017, some months, I got into NixOS. Initially, it was brutally hard to do anything in NixOS. But over time, I got fairly accustomed. And now I'm here like working pretty much on Nix for like 3 years on and off for Tweak. And I'm pretty happy with it still, yes.
Do you also see a pattern in the Nix community, people flocking to particular mindsets or idioms or paradigms for programming computers? I mean, on the show here, we had a bunch of people who are into functional programming, math, formal methods.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Nix is also a functional programming language, a pure functional programming language. Programming language, you don't really write programs with it. It's a language. I guess it's still a programming language. But like oftentimes, I think the only thing that unifies Haskell and Nix is really just the laziness and the purely functional aspect of it. But in almost all other aspects, they're like completely separate languages. And so I don't like comparing them directly, but I guess the underlying ideas of like, you can't just modify things, you need to transform data. These stay the same. So I guess the underlying mindset is the same, but I guess the surface level is much different between those.
Okay, but is there something that brought you into Nix in particular that that stood out as opposed to other ways of managing your systems? I mean, you said it was brutally hard to adopt NixOS, but still you're here.
Yeah, I don't think there was anything in particular. I guess, I mean, if you're in university and you have a bunch of free time on your hand, you like to experiment with some things, and I mean, I couldn't do that now. I think, well, switching to NixOS is really hard, and you need a lot of time for this, and you have that in university. So I don't think there's anything in particular. Like, it sounded fun. It was interesting. The community was very inviting. I really enjoyed that. So back then it was still times of IRC, and I've gotten a ton of help from the people there. And I thought, like, yes, I want to participate and help out and do stuff. And so much things need work. And well, now I'm still here, and still a lot of things need a lot of work. So in a way, not much changed, but a lot of things changed and will.
Yeah, this is definitely something that we will talk about today. So essentially, then you decided, well, I want that to be my job, and you just did?
Yeah, pretty much. So I was like doing my bachelor in university, and I was like, well, what do I want to do? Do I want to continue studying? And I was really not interested in doing more of that stuff. Learning for exams didn't really entice me too much. And I started consulting for Nix towards the end of my bachelor, and was like, well, I know Nix fairly well. It seems to be needed in all around the place. It seems like a pretty good thing to do. And I found Tweak at that point, like after university, who were happy to get me going with Nix. And yeah, that worked out pretty well, I'd say.
Okay, you said a lot about hard problems that I can observe you almost daily digging into. What made you start the Nixpkgs Architecture Team? It's a quite particular area of the ecosystem, also very much at its core.
Yeah, so Nixpkgs, it feels like, or it always felt like it was, or it has been grown very organically. Like when people need something, they implement it. They as long as it works, it sounds good, and there's a lot of people that review things. There's no one that it really has an overview of things. So it's like a lot of separate things that, like a lot of separate ways in which things were achieved in Nixpkgs. And but there's also a lot of problems with this because you don't have a unified interface. There's tens of different approaches of doing the things. None of them are documented properly. When you need something like this, you need to look at others, and if you use one approach, you might not be able to do one thing, and then you need to change it later, and things like that. It's just kind of it has gotten very messy, or maybe it has always been very messy. And I think there needs to be some kind of force to go against that. And well, you could hope that just like people here and there try to do this. So there's like a fairly big list of very significant PRs to Nixpkgs, but no one really can merge them. Like if you do a tree-wide change that completely changes how packages work, that it wouldn't really fly for a single person to merge, or no one wants to do that. And so I think of the architecture team as really a team that kind of can stand behind one of these decisions. We always go through RFCs as well. So we make sure that we take the approach, we have a good approach, we make sure it can work, we test it and stuff, open the RFC, get the RFC accepted, and then when you make one of these big PRs, we can actually click the merge button and make this improvement. And,
okay, so let's take a step back. So so you said you can do lots of different things in Nix packages, and they're kind of all janky, to paraphrase. Can you give us an overview of what Nix packages even is? Do you want to show us a little bit of the code?
Yeah, we could also look, I mean, if you want to enable the screen share, that we could look briefly at the overall structure. And I really think of Nix packages as three separate parts. One of them is lib, personally one of my favorites, that doesn't involve any packages. It's functions for kind of just helper functions here and there. Yeah, then the other part is packages. That's all the packages you have. That's really where the value of Nix packages comes from. Packages depends on lib, so there's a lot of convenience functions it makes use of. And in there, it's not just packages, but also builders. So if you dig one level deeper in here, well, build support is a bit builders development. It's a bit. There's an overview in here. Builders are really functions that produce derivations, and yeah, there's also a section in the manual for this. But yeah, so these are two parts, but the third one is NixOS. Traditionally, NixOS has been outside of the Nix packages repository, but now it's merged together so that you can update. Yeah, when I joined Nix packages, it was already merged. I think that was like 10 years ago, maybe. But yeah, I think of Nix packages as these three main parts. You have kind of a way to access these parts. So NixOS gets accessed, well, there's various ways. You can import the directory, lib as well. Packages, that's generally what you use the default.nix or I guess also flake.nix for. And really it branches off from there and gets into a lot more details and variety of what each of these separate components provides. And by the way, we really need a section in the documentation for this kind of thing. In the current Nix packages manual, it's not actually described what Nix packages is, like in an overview style fashion. So to do for the future.
Yeah, maybe that could be a little seed for that. But that doesn't sound so terrible. I mean, it's just these three things. Why do you think it's so obscure? Or
Right. That's I guess when we go into more details here, for example, top level might be a good example. So these are kind of separate package sets. So inside packages, you have Python packages, Haskell packages, Kubo core packages, and so on. And each of these have kind of a separate way of doing things. In this case, we can see that's a make scope, new scope. That's a fairly popular approach, though I think there's some problems with cross compilation. So if we go to like Python packages in here, it does something completely different. Yes, okay, this is a separate way to do the file. This is an overlay in this case. It would be hard to show you like concretely where all of these things are, but every small part of Nix packages has a separate approach of doing things. And at the scale of, right, we're at 5,200 open PRs, 230,000 merged PRs. At that scale, it gets out of hand very quickly. And I guess one of the core kind of ideas of Nix packages architecture that I think of is to use more CI. We don't want that people or maintainers, so contributors or the committers, maintainers, have to do a lot of these checks themselves. Like, what if someone wants to introduce a new package set? What if someone wants to introduce a new package? They should be able to rely on CI to kind of make sure it conforms to the standards of Nix packages, and to hopefully have a unified structure for that. And we have some CI, although it's currently like really slow. Needs to be fixed. But one of the first things that the architecture team did, well, actually, I guess the only thing, it only existed for a year. We're kind of working very slowly, I'd say. One of the first ones was this simple package path, which introduced this new packages by name directory. Let's see. Yeah, so packages by name.
Go slowly. So this is in the packages top-level directory one of the three things that you talked about in the beginning, and there's this particular directory called by name.
Yes, and I presented this last NixCon. Just before NixCon, we actually merged the PR that introduced this. And people have been busy adding packages to it. We have now, I just counted it earlier, just over 500 packages using this. And the benefit of this is that you don't need to find a place where to define your packages in Nixpkgs. You can just drop it in here. There's a 2-letter prefix, and then this is the package name. And just creating the file makes it possible to use to have the attribute name. And for this thing, I made sure to have CI first and foremost. So in every PR you see now, it actually works pretty quickly. You can see one of these down here, check packages by name, and this makes sure there's no violation. So no one has to manually verify that these prefixes are correct or that the package file uses the correct format. It's all handled by CI. And I really think that's the key to making Nixpkgs work over the long term, to have more CI, to automate more things. We're programmers. That's kind of what we do. We automate things with our computers. And it's really kind of applying that to the scale and the diversity of Nixpkgs.
So I've observed some of your discussions over the past 1 or 1.5 years in the Nixpkgs architecture team. That's by far not the only thing that you've been thinking about rather than just doing in a focused manner. What else do you concern yourself with? I mean, software architecture is definitely more than just moving files around and giving them different names.
Yeah, so the packages by name thing was really an entirely internal change to Nixpkgs. So it's currently not even included in the release notes for the upcoming release. It's so internal and doesn't interface the user interface. But that's, of course, not everything there is to it. There is a lot of user interface exposed by Nixpkgs. And currently that's very implicit. Like there's no definition of like, oh, this is the package set, and each package has a derivation, and the derivation has a file structure. It's really kind of going more towards also changing the user interface and making that better. This could involve things like reorganizing package sets. Currently, the package sets are all very interleaved. Another big one, and this might be one of the next things I'd like to have done, is to reorganize the versions of packages inside Nixpkgs. So currently, they're kind of suffixed with version numbers. So if you have hello and you want a version 2 also to be there, you have to have hello _2. And that's just kind of messy. It makes it hard to override, to know how to discover versions. And really, it could be a lot better, but it needs like a bunch of thought behind that. And it's very general, so it applies to the entirety of Nixpkgs. That's really where the names of the team comes from. It's the architecture of Nixpkgs. It's not, we won't review any specific package update or package refactoring or things like that. So it's really, I think of it as solving things from the ground up, like making a solid foundation for all the packages to be built upon.
Before we continue, I want to remind our live audience to send us your questions. I'd love to read them out loud. Lawrence correctly commented, I probably had a slip up and said next generation internet. Of course, it's next generation internet by the European Commission. Thanks again for making all of this possible for us to build cool things and share knowledge and also have some fun. I wonder, so given Nixpkgs is apparently quite a large project, what makes it so hard to make any changes? So just a little detail, anyone can watch your talk from NixCon from 2 months ago. It took you more than a year from coming up with the idea of reorganizing these package sets to actually implementing that, and 500 packages is nothing compared to the full size of Nixpkgs.
Yeah, so I think probably one of the biggest aspects is just the social one, where if you want to make any kind of change and you have a community of thousands of people, there's going to be a lot of people disagreeing with the change, whatever it is. Like Actually, we're kind of lucky. The change I just showed was fairly uncontroversial. But still, there's always going to be people that think it should be done differently. And so I think that's really why you need RFCs. And then we get into the topic. Yeah, an RFC is, it stands for request for comments. It's a bit of a bad name, but essentially you make a proposal, you get that proposal reviewed by the community, and that's a very democratic process. There's not any single person that can decide over these things, but also everyone can give input to the RFC and say that, oh, there's a big problem here. You didn't think of this aspect. There's a problem with this proposal. And right, so you make that, you get a team together to make the kind of final judgment call on the RFC. And then you hopefully get it accepted. And then that's essentially your ticket to no one should oppose you when you try to implement this. So it's still like there's technical aspects. If it turns out that something doesn't work out the way you intended to, it makes the entirety of Nixpkgs 2 times slower with the approach you proposed. Then, of course, that's a very valid criticism, and it shouldn't be implemented in that case. But it's essentially here's the RFC, we agreed on this, let's not discuss this any further, and let's just work on the implementation without discussing how it should be done.
So it's both a technical and a political document.
Yeah. And maybe just like briefly, suggestions for how to make RFCs is to keep the details and the concrete actions, to keep the details section very concrete and actionable and short, and don't include anything that doesn't need to be there. And I feel like this is the ticket to making RFCs succeed.
Yeah, you've actually merged multiple of them. You're one of the few people who have more than one merged, and just getting one RFC merged, I have experienced it firsthand, is quite exhausting. We have an audience question before we continue talking more about RFCs, because that's one of the big things that you can do in the community. I'll show it on the screen. Tracknar1 asks, how do you envision enforcing or documenting the API of Nixpkgs? As far as I know, currently you have access to a lot of internal functions and structure.
Yeah, I think the key there is really deprecation of old ways to access things. So one kind of very basic idea is that currently we're all accessing Nixpkgs through this default.nix file. And that is like the ultimate API of Nixpkgs. It gives you everything inside of it. But what if we had a separate file? Like, let's imagine we had a Nixpkgs /API.nix file, or API v1.nix file. And this would be like a very generic way to make any change you want to Nixpkgs. You can slowly deprecate the old way of accessing it and do it that way. And then you can dig into like more fine-grained things. So maybe we don't need to make such an API.nix change, but instead we can do that on the package level. So packages already today get deprecated. So you could use separate attribute names. You could also imagine having a Nixpkgs config attribute that says which version of the API you want to use. And so if you use, the default might be version 0, but we introduce version 1, version 0, the implicit default gets deprecated, which means you should always pass config API version equals 1. And that would be I think something like that should work, yes.
So that's like these ideas are fanning out quite quickly. Is that how it works in the Nixpkgs Architecture Team? You get together and someone asks this question, like, okay, so how do we solve like this annoying thing? And then you kind of go wild. But how does it work?
I guess, well, maybe a bit of history. The architecture team originally started like very disorganized. Like we have Nixpkgs. There's a lot of problems. Let's discuss problems. And so we discussed problems, and a lot of them, and it was very varied. But actually, I also mentioned this in the NixCon talk that Valentin, you came to the architecture team who had an in-team meeting at the past NixCon, the one from 2022. And you said, just focus on one thing. And so we're doing that right now. So we are not discussing various issues. And to be honest, there's not a lot of people that have time to actually work on these issues. So it's mostly me, but sometimes also other people helping out a bit. But so I really focus on this one issue of finishing packages by name in this case. And until that's done, I don't want to start anything else. But I mean, if you start something else, I think the approach is really, there's like a very general idea of, how do you call it? Like fanning out and fanning in. There's a better word for this.
Divergence and convergence.
Exactly. Yeah. We talked about this recently a bunch, I think, where Nix packages over the years really diverged in their approaches, right? There's like 10 different approaches of doing things. And in the architecture team, we don't want to do that. Like, I feel like there's solutions to all of the problems that we have currently. But it's really about making it be one solution, not 10. And so really focusing on the converging aspect. And so I guess that would be like, let's look at all the approaches, see what each of them has. Is there a problem with these? Can we mix them together to solve all the problems? Things like that.
That sounds like hardcore engineering. Heavy lifting here. But you are doing other things as well in parallel. And I actually have two questions about that. So first of all, what is it that you're doing? You have so one example is you're running the Nix Hour, kind of a lecture series that also since 2022 NixCon, almost every week for more than a year now, you're working on Nix packages, the library. How do you sustain all of that, and what does that entail? Like, what are you trying to achieve here?
Yeah. I mean, I feel like you need motivation to keep going. And ultimately, what motivates me about Nix is that I think we're going to take over the world, or maybe not Nix, maybe the idea of Nix is going to take over the world. It's a really good idea, the core of it. And there's a lot of problems to fix. So it's kind of an unexplored area. Like if you go to JavaScript, there's a lot of ways of doing things. Probably all the problems have been fixed, though. I don't know too much about that. Maybe there's also a lot of problems there. But the Nix feels like a fairly small community. There's a lot of problems to fix. That seems very interesting to do. And so whenever I hear people, like, there was a thread on Discourse some time ago about like, how were you stuck in the Nix community recently? And just a lot of people complaining about the various things. And I was like, wait, but this could be solved that way. And, oh, I have a good idea there. Could we do it that way? And, but there's so many things. Okay, I need to pick one of them. But there's a lot of potential to do these things. And that's like on the grand scheme of things. But I'm not like always persistent. So I feel like I work in waves where sometimes I feel motivated. So for now's a push, I worked on this library, this new sub-library in Nix packages, and that's mostly done now. And and also we had the hackathon on the weekend, but now I'm gonna be on a down wave for like a couple of days where I'm not going to be doing anything and kind of more relaxing a bit. And right, kind of this balance as well, like work-life balance is interesting. And I consider Nix work. It is my work. I work for Tweak. Yes.
But how do you find time? Don't you do other things for Tweak?
I don't do other things for Tweak. Like I'm doing 100% Nix, and it's all open source. Really, and I mean, I also do some things for Nix in my free time, and it's slowly consuming my life, but I'm working against it.
Hopefully in a good way.
Yeah, and also I feel like in university I was much more like rising my system and trying to make it work nice, setting up servers and stuff. But nowadays I'm like, I barely have any time to configure my system. My rebuild on my other laptop is broken right now, and I just need to fix it and look into the issue, but I don't really find the time because there's all of these things to do with Nix packages and stuff. But it's fun. I enjoy it.
Lawrence has a great question or contribution about the jungle. For me, part of the jungle is that so much of Nixpkgs or NixOS depends on bash scripts, which I perceive as hacky. Do you share this opinion? If so, what should replace bash? And what do you think about ideas and experiments to replace bash with, for example, with new-env, or use Haskell as a shell, like SHH?
Yeah, that was actually one of the hottest topic in the architecture team in the beginning. We were all kind of bashing bash and trying to find a better replacement for it. I think in the end we kind of settled that it wasn't as big of a problem as we thought, because if you look at most package definitions, they don't actually depend on bash. They have all of these variables like CMake flags, or, well, I guess if you declare the phases yourself, then that's where bash comes in. But most of them have just these build inputs, native build inputs, and underneath bash handles those. But underneath we could also switch to something else. The kind of surface of it doesn't depend on bash. And so, yes, a lot of the core depends on bash, and that should probably also be done at some point. But it's really hard. Like, I feel like we might need to make some advancements in Nix itself. So I guess you can also say the architecture team tries to not make changes to Nix itself. We're trying to get by with what Nix provides. But sometimes you need to go into Nix, like when you need something to be more performant. Regarding bash, there's an idea of using WASM to run derivations. And that would probably solve a whole bunch of problems we have. But that's a very internal change.
It will also probably produce a lot of problems.
Yeah, probably also.
On the way, at least.
Okay. Every change you make is gonna, well, hopefully the rate of new problems decreases after the change. And technologies like bash have the tendency to introduce a lot of problems. So, yeah.
Before we speak about the future, conquering the world, and possible visions for the future of Nixpkgs and Nix ecosystem, let's talk about what the other things that you were involved with, especially RFCs. So you contributed a lot to refining and trying to streamline the RFC process, which is in the community still very much perceived as being very, very much burdened by friction. What else are we working on? Which RFCs have you been involved with recently?
Yeah, probably the one I'm most excited about recently is number 166. Maybe you can enable the screen share there, yeah. And this is about Nix formatting, the number one bike sharing topic around the block. And so we worked on this. So yes, take two. So Pkgs is the main author of it. I'm the co-author. And this is a continuation of RFC 101. And so yeah, our 101 was open like, I think, 2 or 3 years ago, and it didn't really make too much progress. And yeah, two years ago only, or 2.5 years ago. And it didn't really make too much progress. And I think like after a year or so, I kind of stepped in and was like, hey, I want to participate. I want to be a shepherd. Let's meet every second week, we said. And so we did that throughout the entire year of 2023 and had I think it was 20 meetings around. And we worked on this RFC. And so it takes a completely new approach. The overview of it is we defined the standard Nix format actually in the RFC. So you can look in there and see what we're proposing, how Nix should look, formatted.
With Nix, you mean also, the Nix language?
Exactly, yeah. So things like where should commas be and where should semicolons be, things like that. That's the one part, but also you can't specify everything, and we might need changes occasionally. And so this shouldn't be a full specification of it. We should be able to make changes. So we say, let's have a Nix format team to make changes to it, to maintain it, to make sure it's conforming, stuff like that. Then we need to make a code base that can actually do that. And Pkgs has been really busy actually implementing this in a repository. And right then we need to be responsible, and we need to actually make the change in Nix packages, which is the primary target of code formatting debates. And
sorry.
And finally, that the Nix CLI must also use this as the default formatting. That's a big step.
For those who may not be as deeply involved, why is formatting Nix expressions such a topic of hot debate, and why is it so important that you spent the entire year on figuring that out?
Yeah, that's so if you go into Nix packages, you will see all kinds of different formattings, and that's something that, well, by now I think people like stay back from it a bit more because it is always a bit of a topic. But yeah, so when a contributor makes a change or adds a new Nix file, and the formatting looks off, like imagine you have a line that's like 500 characters long. I haven't seen that personally, but imagine. And someone needs to point out that this doesn't look that well, let's format it in this way. But of course, everyone wants to format it in a different way. There's no standard of it. And we should have one to avoid these debates. That really also goes into this automation aspect. We should have CI that just checks the formatting. If it's violating the standard guidelines, it should be reformatted. And this way, no one needs to actually in a review point out that this doesn't look good. And we can save a bunch of time that way. And also, hopefully make the code look nice and uniform, and so you can read it easier.
So is that more along the lines of the Nixpkgs architecture mission to conquer complexity with automation?
It's along those lines. I wouldn't call the RFC on formatting to be part of the architecture team. It doesn't really touch upon it's a very internal change, and it doesn't require any like thinking how it should be structured. But yes, it goes in that direction. It goes into the idea of automation is key to the scale of Nix packages.
We have another audience question, and for everyone else, please send your questions. Silvan is here to answer them and ideally discuss. So I'm almost looking forward to interesting debates here. Christian Kemper, I hope I pronounced it right, Christian Kemper, would love to see some hooks for credentials helpers. Handling private resources that aren't necessarily Git repos are quite painful at the moment. So hooks, maybe you briefly explain the concept, how this plays into Nix packages.
Yeah, hooks are generally kind of small. Okay, we're touching bash again here. Generally small bash functions that run when you build a derivation, and these hooks are fairly easy to integrate into derivations. So every derivation itself can declare setup hooks, and when you add that derivation as a native build input, the hook gets executed when the build of the dependent derivation starts. I'm not sure if you actually mean those hooks. Private resources are always a bit tricky in Nix, and I don't really have a good answer here, to be honest. Like secret, there have been some proposals over the years. There's actually a new RFC on hopefully helping with the secret handling in Nix more generally. There's also been, it was one of the first RFCs, RFC number 5, which also tried to tackle that problem, but it didn't really go anywhere. And so, yeah, I guess help is needed there. There are some approaches from the community to help with that a bit, though. Although I guess it's more focused on NixOS deployments. There's things like HNix and SubsNix. I'm not an expert on these, so probably not a very good question for me.
Okay, here Paul just gives some positive feedback. Thanks for what you're doing, Silvan. And Temo chimes in with, yeah, seriously. So there's, I suppose, Nixpkgs architecture work is greatly appreciated. Live audience is hard on the internet. We have people from all over the world. Many people will watch this after the show has been run. So this is actually very encouraging to have that kind of feedback.
Thank you.
yes, what's in the immediate future? Is there something cooking behind the scenes, something that you're already slating for when you're finally done with RFC 140 and the thing that you have just shown?
So personally, there's like 10 different things I'd like to focus on, but I need to pick one. And I'm slowly realizing this the longer I work on Nix. Just the more things you have going on, the less efficient you are. They already have a bunch of things going on. I don't necessarily like the Nix hour is going on. It's not taking too many resources, but it's also something that's needing context switches. There's the formatting RFC. So I think after the RFC 140, I might try to focus on the formatting, because this RFC needs a bit of help. We need to make sure the code base works. We need to actually do the Nixpkgs changes. There's probably a lot of bugs to fix, things like that. And after that, I am considering joining more Nix development. So Nix, the Nix code base is at the core of Nix, and it's influencing Nix packages and everything around Nix, and it needs a lot of help. And actually, you wrote the kind of reach out and the announcement from the Nix team about stabilizing the CLI, and then slowly also Flakes. And you need help there. Like that's a lot of work to do. Someone should take a look at these issues a bit more closely, to hopefully find a good solution. And I might consider helping there a bit.
Yeah, that would be definitely appreciated. But then what's going to happen to Nixpkgs architecture? Don't you rather need help with running the whole thing and continuing it?
That's true. I feel like everyone needs help. And I know also like Robert Hensing is everywhere as well. He was there last week in this series. He's also on the architecture, Nixpkgs Architecture Team. He's also on the Nix team. He's also, I think, still trying to maintain NixOps. I'm also doing various things, and we all need help in all of these aspects. So I guess it's really, one approach to doing this is to really help more people get onboarded into these things. So, for example, I feel like Nixpkgs lib is an aspect that would be very interesting to a lot of people. And currently, I'm maintaining that with Robert as well. And so whenever there's a PR to the lib part of Nixpkgs, I'm probably going to review that. But yeah, if people are interested in like functional programming, people coming from Haskell, the lib is really an aspect that you might be interested in, and we could appreciate some help. And so maybe going more towards like mentoring people and really onboarding them to these issues, onboarding them or explaining to them how stuff works, and kind of doing that also with the Nix hour, where I'm really just spreading knowledge all the time. And yeah,
I can definitely recommend watching that. There's how many 50, 60
like 53 episodes, yes,
episodes on all kinds of topic all over the place, from modules to Nix language features to how builds work, shells, like everything you can imagine about the Nix ecosystem. You just go through everything. Definitely worth watching. Before we continue with more vision and future, here's some audience questions. Great, Artemo, thank you very much for sending that. I'm not sure whether it was Robert H. Yes, Robert said that the NixOS uses the module system quite inefficiently. Do you know how making it more efficient would roughly look like? Does that also concern the Nixpkgs architecture team?
NixOS is, I guess, a bit of a gray zone, but it is in Nixpkgs, and I'm also interested in that. So let's talk about it. But I think it was definitely Robert. But yeah, it uses the module system inefficiently in that there's this huge, and maybe we can briefly go into there here. There's this huge list in the NixOS directory in modules. If you scroll down here to module list, that's the way in which it is inefficient. So all of these modules are always loaded for every NixOS evaluation. By now, there's like 1,500 of them. And this means that The good thing is that you always have the options available. So if you, I guess I can't show it right now here, but you can always say like services dot something dot enable equals true. That's great, but it makes it really slow. And so I think the idea that Robert is really encouraging more is for other systems that want to use a module system, to not have this huge list and instead require users to manually add the modules that they want. In turn, they get enabled by default. So you might not have to do the enable option anymore. Instead, you just import the module. And that would probably help a lot, but I'm not. So I'm also a module system maintainer. I think Robert also talked about this last in the meeting. But yeah, that would be the approach, and it might work out. Although for NixOS, it would be kind of hard to migrate to that because people are used to being able to say .enable equals true. You would have to implement some deprecation strategy for making that a smooth transition.
Okay. Charles-Edouard, I hope I pronounced it correctly, has a very, very detailed technical question. Is there a way to build Android applications with allow untree equals false? Again, please explain us what is this allow untree false? How does it play into the question?
Yeah, so Nixpkgs by default doesn't evaluate for unfree packages. So if you set unfree, it's a bit of a vague term. It's generally, no, actually, I'm no license expert. I better not answer, otherwise people might be confused. So let's just say, I think proprietary software comes under that. Things like I think generally proprietary software, that's probably the most accurate one. But yeah, so by default, it's kind of turned off. And so if you want to use proprietary software, you need to allow unfree to turn that on. And Android applications, so I know nothing about Android. So even though I've been in Nixpkgs for like 6 years or so, there's a lot of aspects I don't know about it. So Android is one part of that. I never developed for Android. So I'll have to defer that question.
Okay. Well, let's talk about the future then, to which we defer so many things because there's so much to do and only so few people available to do the things. What are your visions, what your ideas where Nixpkgs could go in the next, say, 5 to 10 years? I remember over the years, ongoing discussion about splitting up Nixpkgs into multiple small repositories, restructuring it completely, having different approaches to who is allowed to maintain what, things like these. What's your take on this?
That's a good question. Yeah, I like it. Often crosses my mind that we should split up Nixpkgs, and I've recently come across this again with lib. Like the lib component of Nixpkgs is like entirely on its own. It does have some very minor dependencies on packages, but those aren't like essential. And so, yeah, what if we split out lib and make that a separate repository? We would add like me, Robert, and probably some other people that maintain like system stuff. Although I guess the system subcomponent of the lib component would be, maybe shouldn't be split up. So lib would be one component that often crosses my mind. There's standard environment. So standard environment is the underlying tool set that kind of bootstraps the entirety of Nixpkgs. So you start off with some binary blob somewhere, and you build up from that. You build GCC on that, various packages. In the end, you end up with the entire package set. That standard env often crosses my mind that we could maybe split that off. But that might work well. There's another idea for splitting off this kind of more layers of like base packages. So there's like these libraries that a lot of packages depend on, like I don't know, libc would be the prime example, or what is it? Don't quite know. Anyways, a lot of libraries. And then the final layer might be the kind of end user applications. Like if I run Firefox, there's like no packages depending on Firefox. Well, hopefully. And these kinds of things could be their own layer in an own repository. And there is these layers that we might think about. Yeah, and so I see the flake question coming in there.
The inevitable flake question.
Yes.
But I still let's still dig deeper a little bit into this. What's the problem with that? Couldn't you just kind of fork lib out, and then since you're lib maintainers, that's now lib? Couldn't you just do it?
There is like generally in the Nix ecosystem, there is a bit of a problem with how to make things official, what things are official, how things stop being official. And so if you wanted to do that, you might go to some repo admin. So that's some organization admin, and ask them, let's make this. And then they might say, well, do we really need that? Would people agree with this? Can we call that official? And these kinds of issues. And that was also the motivation for, before last NixCon, I started kind of this discussion about how to do governance in Nix packages, because this is kind of a governance issue there. And currently, right, we barely have any structure. There's a lot of projects that should maybe be deprecated, like NixOps. I mean, I know Robert is kind of maintaining it still, but like it's not. Well, I'm not sure. I don't want to say anything about the state of NixOps right now. But for example, Hydra is like barely maintained. Like, should we have a requirement that all official projects should have a maintainer and an active maintenance team? Things like that. And then could be the idea of if you want to make something official, you need to have at least 2 maintainers for something, or could maybe be trimmed down depending on the project. But so yeah, it could be, let's make lib a separate component. How to do it? Maybe with an RFC. RFCs certainly establish this notion of like people agree on it. And yeah, then let's have me and Robert at least as maintainers, hopefully some more people. There's also the idea, should all Nix packages committers be maintainers? Because currently they're essentially maintainers of lib. Like if I suddenly stop being there, who's going to take over? And
sounds like a job for the community architecture, not just software architecture.
Yes, it's a very social issue, and personally, I'm not too good at social issues. I think I'm more I tend to be more on the technical side, but probably everyone says that of themselves. So yeah, that would also be something for the future. Maybe go more towards these social issues, how to run a community, how to make it go smoothly, how to have more accountability, responsibility for individual teams, projects, and so on.
Yeah, this will definitely be a topic with Ron Afroni and Elko Dolstra from the NixOS Foundation Board in a couple of days or weeks. I'm not sure exactly when the next show with them will be. Before we slowly come to an end, here's let's talk about flakes. Jawuku, will flakes become the default method for configuration in the future? We'll leave the timetable thing to the Nix maintainers, to whom we will talk on, I think, December 3rd. But so again, let's orient the discussion. What do flakes have to do with Nix packages and Nixpkgs architecture?
Yeah, currently flakes are essentially not used in Nix packages, and that's for, I think, still a very good reason. And so flakes always copies the entire source into the Nix store. Nix packages is huge, so I think it's still the case that it's fairly slow to use flakes for Nix, though I think it might not be too slow, although I have a really fast hard drive or SSD. But so also touches upon the aspect of could flakes be used to split Nix packages into multiple parts? Personally, I guess we need to, like, generally, my opinion on flakes is that it adds a lot of nice features, but they're not, I need to watch out what I say here. They're not like exclusive to Flakes, a lot of them. So there are some core things it does provide. So things like the eval cache, and that's really nice. Things like pure evaluation, like practical pure evaluation. But you can also get like fairly far without using Flakes. So and you will rarely see me use Flakes in the Nix hour. Yet I still get reproducible configurations out there. One of the things there is pure evaluation. Pure evaluation is actually a stable feature, except it's really hard to use it without Flakes. And so I think that should be kind of split off and made its own thing. And I think that's also how Flake stabilization will hopefully happen. Like, let's make pure evaluation, cached evaluation its own thing, make it usable as a Nix built-in. I actually have a proposal for this, or a very drafty proposal for this. Then we have stable pure evaluation and cached evaluation. Let's stabilize the locking independently. So currently there's like NIV, there's npins, but also Flakes, who all do kind of locking in their own way. They all have their benefits, their drawbacks. And I guess it's again, let's converge on a single solution that works very well and can be used independently. And yes, I think from what I heard, that's also the plan of the Nix team, to split up these things. But we like resources. Everyone likes resources for doing these things. And so it might still take a while. But I'm hopeful and also intending to help more with that. So, let's see.
I'm sorry if I'll poke you, because it sounded like you feel you have a controversial opinion on Flakes. I remember, I think maybe I misremember, but I remember people writing somewhere that Flakes should be the canonical converged upon solution for these issues, problems, features that we want to have.
Yeah, I guess the most convincing argument I can give for why I don't think that should be the case is that Nix at its core is like a really nice idea. You have this idea of derivations and being like transforming data essentially. But Flakes feels a bit of a step back from a clear model to me. And so you have these, one of the core things is this flake.nix file, which isn't actually a proper Nix file. Like, it disallows some Nix syntax that up to now has confused a lot of people. Like, you can't use let bindings at the top of the flake level. And that just kind of makes the underlying model of Flakes a bit uglier. And another part is the system handling. So on different systems, you need to always propagate the system parameter through Flakes. Is there not a better way? Will we end up having to write these flake.nix files with the system parameter for decades into the future? And that's kind of the stability guarantee that Nix should provide. And I think we can do better. And I'd be sad if we didn't explore ways to do that in a better way.
Okay, since we're running out of time, sorry for that we didn't get to answering the concrete question, but I think it was an interesting exploration of the problem space. Last question for today before we wrap up. How can people help you do better? How can people help and get engaged and help solve the resource problem?
I think it's probably taking interest in all of these issues and just looking around, reading the code, how does it work, untangling things, and communicating with others. Like, if you're interested in Nixpkgs architecture, helping out there, join the architecture team, ask people for how does this work? What do you need help with? Can I help with doing some code implementation? Or the same for Nix, like maybe check out the Nix meeting notes. Like, the Nix team needs people implementing the CLI stabilization, and really kind of staying informed, talking with people, these kinds of things.
Well, I hope that this show is the first step to talk to people, which we did today. Really amazed. Thank you very much for your questions today. Thank you very much, Silvan, for being here today and giving us so much insight and in depth into what's going on in Nixpkgs and Nixpkgs architecture. The next show will be on this Thursday, 30th of November at 10:30 UTC. We will meet Vincent Ambo and Florian Klink and answer the question, what's up with Twix? Thank you very much for being here today, and see you next time at the 2023 Nix Developer Dialogues. Until next time. Bye.